Yes. So I know that you've all read the paper and come up with some really great probing questions, so I won't rehash all that in detail, but just briefly to set the stage of what prompted this paper. I felt like a lot of the discussion in the literature around arms races toward AI and potential arms races didn't take into account the relationship between what we refer to as the surface area of the problem and how nation states actually make strategic decisions. So I felt by exploring how that tension could play out, we could open up some profitable areas for exploration on what sorts of incentives states may face over the coming decade or more, and namely find some arguments for why the incentives that major powers face may be sharply discontinuous at some point. So that's the gap that we intend to fill with this, and we're really looking forward to diving into your questions, unless, Matthijs, you have anything else you'd like to add right off the top.
Yeah, no, so I think what drew me to the paper, the topic, is the sort of intersection of questions around scientific uncertainty and scientific processes around AI, and sort of outside and inside views of timelines and what's involved in certain trajectories of AGI development, and then connecting those sort of epistemic or scientific questions to strategic and governance questions on the other hand. And there's a lot of moving parts in there and a number of uncertainties, but that makes an interesting basis also for understanding what are the sort of relevant parameters to think about the intersection of either so the AGI development and progress in the coming years, or perceptions of such development and progress, and how that will feed back into the problem of AI governance and the problems of solving and addressing AI safety.
Okay, great. So I should also add that Zoom has this raise your hand feature, or alternatively, if you have a question, please type the question in the chat, and then I'll try to maintain some kind of queue of questions. But the first question will be from this list here, which is when the situation where AGI might not be a Manhattan Project away, but something that I here refer to as AGI Light could be a Manhattan Project away, which is an AGI that is much less general, only capable of doing a particular strategic task, and whether that would be sufficient for state actors to pursue a Manhattan Project against.
My sense of it is the answer to that will differ among the 6 strategic cognitive domains that are listed here. Intelligence amplification obviously has huge implications for superintelligence and spiraling effects that could have absolutely decisive strategic outcomes. So for that one, absolutely that could justify a Manhattan Project. Strategizing, I wasn't quite sure what was meant there. Could the questioner maybe flesh out a little bit more detail?
I was the one who posed this question, and I took this actually from Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence, where there is some more description of subtasks in under the heading of strategizing. It's long-term planning and modeling different actors and their incentives in order to obtain distant strategic goals, this kind of thing.
Yes, so that seems to have some forking along different domains. There are some areas where strategizing in narrower contexts would not seem to imply a very general intelligence, and others in which it absolutely would, when it requires some very abstract world model or representation of how many different factors come together. Similarly, social manipulation at a high level would likely require a very general kind of intelligence in that way. I can see how technology research in some areas might not, but the overall strategic impact of AI that can productively advance, let's say, valuable tech patents would be quite a strong incentive. Hacking is an interesting subject there because most real life hacking has a human component. The most effective hackers are generally the ones who don't train some $1 million supercluster to crack something by brute force, but rather they offer someone male enhancement pills and play on their human insecurities somehow and fish them. So there are some components of hacking that would not imply a very general intelligence at all. That is the more brute force, mechanistic, algorithmic approaches, and then some which are in fact not much different from social manipulation.
I think it's also interesting though, or yeah, if I may, so there's the question of AGI Lite as on a technical level, or sort of like how useful are the capabilities, but also there could be on a political level the question of, well, would it induce a Manhattan Project? And the Manhattan Project, of course, is sort of it's a sprint not just out of we would like to have it, it will be useful, but it's about a desperation of like, we need to have this before the other side gets it or before anyone else gets it. And I think in that sense, it's interesting to look at these because I could imagine some capabilities amongst these that are undeniably useful, but I'm not sure if interestingly, so strategizing for me is an interesting one, because if you have a system that can only do strategizing at a human level and it doesn't have intelligence amplification, so it doesn't get better, in a weird way, I can see that hitting diminishing returns pretty quickly. It's in the sense that if you, in the same sense that a military doesn't hire a 1,000 people to sort of come up with a strategy. At some point, it's just a number of generals in a room, and so I could see if it was just about a system helping plan campaigns and stuff, having AGI level capabilities on just strategizing saves you labor costs, but at some point you don't need more, and at some point perhaps adding 100 more systems doesn't meaningfully improve your military campaign beyond just hiring 30 generals. And so I guess it's interesting that there's some of these where, and again, intelligence amplification, it's hard to imagine you having that without it sort of really cashing out into the other capabilities at some point down the line. But if it was only intelligence amplification and it was sort of like, oh yeah, you just got very, very narrow improvements on a very narrow other task that doesn't really generalize beyond it, then of course you're not really talking about AGI in the first place then. But I could see that not necessarily triggering a Manhattan Project rush. Technology research and economic productivity would really depend on whether a state believes sort of so if I'm China and I believe the US is about to have an AGI Lite in technology research, whether I'm one to pursue a Manhattan Project towards a AGI Lite technology research capability depends on what I think is in reach. If I think that capability will allow the US to crack fusion power, well, I mean, that would be great, and I would really be, that would be disadvantage for us. It would be an advantage for the US. But if I think that this capability in technological research will allow the US to, within the next 5 years, develop sort of unbeatable aircraft or a way to overcome the Chinese sort of nuclear deterrent, that would be the grounds for, if I was China, to start a Manhattan Project, Rush.
Yes, I would also push back on the premise of the question a little bit, in that arms race decisions are made under profound uncertainty. It's very hard to know in advance how limited an AGI light would be. And personally, it's hard for me to imagine what sort of evidence could strongly persuade China that they almost certainly can sprint to social manipulation in 5 years, but almost certainly cannot sprint to technology research in 5 years. At that level of abstraction, I think our prior should be that intelligence is too fluid to make predictions like that with any kind of confidence.
Okay, great. I think David had a question here. David, would you like to repeat your question?
Yeah, so I had a quick question about your commentary on the social persuasion superpower in particular, though to some extent it generalizes to the rest of them. You said that at some level that requires a high level abstract world model, which I agree it does for doing persuasion the way humans do it, but isn't that an unnecessarily anthropocentric view on persuasion? I could easily imagine GPT's N-style text predictor becoming extremely persuasive under the right circumstances. And if I am correct about that, would that change your answer at all?
I think actually, so it's interesting. I mean, maybe John, you also have some thoughts on that. So it's an interesting fact, because I think there's a degree to which you're right that you could have persuasive systems that are involved into even like GPT-N, or even, I mean, there's currently studies on the potential to use GPT-3 and even GPT-2 in the past to produce ideologically aligned content or radicalizing content. And I think there's a study that came out a couple of weeks ago, that showed that you can use it to create ideologically tailored content that conceivably, since humans can't reliably distinguish between GPT-3 content and human generated content, would be as persuasive as any propaganda at least is. I guess there is a sense in which there might be a harder degree to which, if we're talking about a sort of like a general persuader. So in a very different paper, the policy desiderata, so Nick Bostrom, Alan Defoe, and Carrick Flynn, I think I think it's now called a vector field approach. Anyway, they discussed the idea of a super persuader, which is a system that can persuade anyone of anything. And that, I think, would be something more than just targeting people with sort of a preset ideological content. It sort of implies that you have a system that will be able to turn me against my family in a sense, or turn me into, and that, I guess, is a higher level of, I think that second capability might require a world model, but it's true that I think that it might be the case that for many practical purposes of ideological conversion, near-term systems could work. But maybe John, you have also some thoughts.
Yes,
sorry,
I think,
can you put the name of that paper into the chat?
Yeah, I'll find it.
Put it on my reading list.
Sure.
Okay.
I think persuasion is still rather poorly understood from a neurological standpoint. We don't yet have a scientific basis for saying what the strongest form of persuasion might look like. Is it possible that a GPN could find the right words to convince anyone to turn against their family in a tweet length number of characters. My intuition says no, but the science on that is still, I think, just so immature that we have a lot to learn.
Okay, I'll go to the next question here, Louise. And that is the fact that nuclear weapons are actually a really, really attributable kind of technology, in that if you expend half the effort of a Manhattan-style project, then you get half a bomb, and that won't work. So it's a very discontinuous technology, whereas we expect that something like GPT-3 seems to improve continuously, in that the more compute you add to it, the better it becomes. And that seems like it's the fact that there are half an AGI might be have some ability to do social manipulation, and some ability to do economic productive. And there are a number of other advantages here. Gwern have some where you can use, once you have this model, then you can use it to train other models. And how does this change if it turns out that AGI, that it's a more continuous case where you put in a bit of effort and then you get enough money for it to pay for itself quickly?
Yes, so we think a Manhattan-style project makes sense for something that is more continuous than nuclear weapons, but not fully continuous. There's at least good a priori reason to believe that there will be some discontinuities on the road to AGI. For example, once AI is able to read English with strong comprehension, it can gobble up an enormous store of very rich conceptual symbolic information that it currently doesn't have access to. That is to say, sort of reading all of Wikipedia and remembering it perfectly. So computers have advantages inherently in speed and memory that will be unlocked once the natural language processing and some other cognitive faculties reach human level. So I see a bottleneck there that should get us thinking maybe this would be a discontinuity.
Yeah, I think this gets us a little bit into debates over to what extent we sort of would follow the scaling hypothesis of that GPTN will basically get us to AGI. In which case, yeah, that seems that we're in a way already, yeah, on a runway, or it's basically, yeah, you could just scale it up and all of it's going to be continuous, or whether we expect a sort of more it's an assembly of pieces, and perhaps each of the individual modules will have some sort of limited domain area faculty. So you have systems that can do language generation. You've got some systems that are able to do limited causal reasoning then. But that those there might be incremental benefits, but that in some sense you only get a large leap in benefits once you put them all together. And to the extent, if you want to stretch the analogy, you could argue that there were limited benefits to nuclear research even before you had a nuclear bomb, in the sense that you could get people work in nuclear power. You get it could feed into sort of nuclear like radiation medicine. I agree that those aren't quite as salient in that sense. I think it's a question of whether the scenario here is indeed that like it's continuous, in the sense that each of the individual capabilities is already really great, and then when you really get to AGI, it's just a cherry on top, so it's like 50% better, or whether we're talking just qualitatively more powerful. But it's an interesting distinction. I think also there's a brief side question there, that nuclear, at least after the sort of Manhattan Project era, other states have faced the question of like, well, you want to build a nuclear, you might want to have a nuclear breakout, but the finishing line is no longer just having a operable nuclear weapon, but it's having a deliverable deterrent. And so you need to raise not, to having a single nuclear weapon, but to having something that can be survivable. Anyway.
Thank you for the answer. So the next question is from Ali. Ali, would you pose your question, please?
I think I did. I'll just the last thing I posted. That's basically what I was. Yeah, that's probably the question I would ask.
Sorry, that was with the decaying of the infrastructure, or
I'll just read it out, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Suppose you try to make an AGI and fail because you were 5 years too early. 5 years hence, would you be in a substantially better position than someone who had no experience at attempting to make an AGI? Of course, you means the relevant sort of entity, like a state, a massive corporation, etc., etc. I think that this is somewhat interesting in the case where you have, say, continuous progress, or where you have something like the timescales to AGI are not really that long. So say if it's in the next 50 years and it's plausible that you could just make a mistake 10 years and be 10 years too early.
So in a sense, you could argue that, well, without having sort of the shorter 5-year timeline, one of the cases that we sort of refer to is that in the 80s, DARPA was running a project in pursuit of what they didn't call it AGI, but we would now call it AGI, and they failed. And I'm less clear about sort of where the infrastructure, the expertise of that specific project went in the succeeding decades. But I could imagine a lot of it sort of was diffused or at least folded into other projects in the defense sector or elsewhere. I guess the interesting case then here could be something like DARPA tried in the 80s to make a AGI or like an human level AI, but they failed. But what if Russia during the 90s had made a breakthrough that seemed that they were very close? How easy would it have been for the US to sort of reassemble a team and be like, oh, hold on, we were actually pretty close. It seems that, as John Clark says, that having had the infrastructure and the trained up people, that if you ran into a wall, but someone else finds a piece of insight that makes the surface area much larger, you could just remobilize those materials. But of course, that does imply that you haven't sort of like poisoned the well, and people are just unwilling to sort of spend money on this or to accept this as a new project. That's actually, I would need to think about this more in detail because it's an interesting scenario.
So, John, you have written something? I guess that's your answer.
Yes, it seems plausible to me. The only thing I would just add is that if an AGI Manhattan project fails, the reason would likely be that the surface area was too small, and so a lot of the effort will, in hindsight, turn out to have been wasted. So that's something to at least keep in mind as a plausible reason for the failure, which may suggest that the actual progress made toward fulfillment of AGI would be smaller than you'd expect just from the number of dollars spent.
Okay, so the next question is with some of the historical examples. In your paper you have some examples of projects like ITER or the International Space Station. But there's another kind of reference class you could do with things like if AGI could potentially give a decisive strategic advantage to either you or your rival, then you might look at things like total war in the Second World War, where Germany and the Soviet Union were both faced with this particular choice, and indeed chose to devote many resources to this. And that was one other kind of possible parallel. The other was with dreadnoughts, where the introduction of a new technology suddenly spurned an enormous arms race. What do you think about these two kinds of alternative parallels?
That is a great question. I don't think that the dreadnought parallel is very instructive here, because as revolutionary as dreadnought was, it was still vastly more incremental than nuclear weapons or the prestige of landing first on the moon or what we think is likely with AGI. Dreadnought could still hit a mine and go right to the bottom. Also, very key is that the arms race in battleships in the early 20th century was asymmetric between the Royal Navy and the Imperial German Navy. What I mean by that is, strategically, all Germany had to do was tie up the Royal Navy. Britain had this vast overseas empire with shipping lanes in every ocean that it had to defend. And by contrast, Germany didn't have anywhere near that kind of footprint that it had to defend over the seas. Thus, Germany could lose a battle tactically and win strategically just by reducing the relative advantage that Britain had. So I think dreadnought would have been decisive if Germany's main goal had been winning a Trafalgar-esque showdown in the North Sea, but that just wasn't their goal. So for that reason, I don't see dreadnought, as revolutionary as it was, as being that kind of game changer.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, and the other question, the other parallel, where the Manhattan Project possibly was existential, but World War II for the United States surely was existential, or almost existential, and they were willing to devote apparently 100 times as many resources to winning the Second World War. So that seems to imply a much larger willingness to invest when it seems necessary.
I disagree with that analysis. The Manhattan Project, I think, only cost that little because the US didn't know how to allocate more resources to get the bomb sooner. If they could have gotten the bomb in 1943 for 10 times as much money, it seems quite likely that they would have done so. Also, I would add that the Manhattan Project would have been existential for the US if Germany had gotten there first. And that was the single driving worry behind the project in the first place. So if the US hadn't taken it as seriously and Germany had gotten the bomb first, especially if by a margin of several months or a year or two, there's a very good chance that the US ultimately would have been heavily atom bombed, carved up, enslaved, and put under totalitarian rule. So by my lights, at least, that's pretty existential.
So I think it's an interesting question over like what makes technology existential, what makes it perceived to be existential. And so there's an interesting case so at the end of World War II where there was a debate essentially over what would be the relations between the Western allies and the Soviet Union, where there were advocates at the time, including controversially Russell, who's later the pacifist, who advocated for a nuclear strike against the Soviet Union. in order to prevent sort of what they fear would be the inevitable nuclear arming and then a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And at the time, Stalin perceived this to be so at least somewhat existential. I think there's sort of quotes where he instructs his physicists sort of like, we must have the bomb, or it's sort of like, the exact phrasing escapes me. But there are interesting cases in later eras of nuclear armament where there's interesting cases of, and strange cases sometimes of nuclear restraint. And sometimes you could argue, well, that was the case because of states being willing to, like, oh, we can get under the nuclear umbrella of some of the great powers, so why do we need to do it ourselves? And sometimes there's cases, I think Argentina and Brazil, I think, were running nuclear programs in the 60s and 70s. I mean, it was Venezuela, but so basically they had fought a war in the late 1800s. There was some rivalry and some sort of territorial contestation, but at some point, it's sort of the program's cost exceeded the sense. So it's an interesting question under what circumstances, especially you could argue that there might be under peacetime circumstances that states might be less prone to rush, whereas under tense geopolitical circumstances, and especially during wartime, just these types of sprints are more plausible.
Okay, so the next question here is how large do we actually expect the surface area to be? In the case of GPT-3, which seems like it's currently our best guess at what could become AGI, at least in the near terms, there are apparently quite a lot of things that can be done outside of the core researchers who are working with it. In the paper itself, they point out many things that could be done, and it seems like they could easily scale very widely, in particular with something like fine-tuning, which seems like it would require a lot of effort, but potentially also have a very large impact.
So there are certainly... oh, go ahead.
No, the question was if we are already at the point where 1 in 1,000 or something could participate potentially in a GPT-N.
When you say participate, you mean in some kind of a decentralized collaborative effort?
No, rather it's in a Manhattan-style project where everybody who has an education or know how to program a computer, they start working on fine-tuning this large model.
I see. Yes. So there.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
There are certainly ways of improving GPT-3, probably by a lot. It is deeply unclear whether they can scale that all the way to AGI. It is possible, but I think the most useful signal there, the best evidence, is that as far as we can tell, OpenAI has not been seeking vastly larger resources for such a sprint. And because they know more about their own technology than we do, at least as our prior, that tells me that if they knew how to spend the money, they would be.
Yeah, I think this question might, also partially reduce to simply which of the three scenarios that we discussed also do we believe are on, and do we believe sort of if you follow the scaling hypothesis, then it would in a sense be a functional, like we have the underlying architecture, now it's a question of scaling it up sufficiently, and in that case you could argue that we can do a Manhattan project. The surface area is, well, basically, I guess from a scientific point of view, irrelevant, because you don't need deep scientific insights, you can just scale up you can arbitrage money for compute for performance. If there is a more sort of ambiguous one where, okay, we feel like this is getting closer. So I feel like it's the question of, can 1 in 1,000 people participate at what? And so which people can be trained or retrained to contribute to chip production, or at least elements that feed into that? Which people can, what is the threshold for contributing to the production of, or provision or labeling of data? That's the bottleneck. Whereas if we think that the underlying bottleneck is something very sort of fundamental or theoretical, then you could argue that, well, it might be still a fairly constrained number of people that could participate with that. But on the object level here, I confess I've also been impressed by sort of seeing some of the GPT-3. I think we wrote the initial version of the paper just after GPT-3 came out, and it's been interesting since then seeing some of the broader debate within the community. And I'm very curious to see where it goes in the coming year, and sort of how far things like these can be scaled up.
So I should just say here that we will have Jared Kaplan, the person who predicted that GPT-3 would continue to scale, will be joining the reading group and presenting just like this, basically, on the 29th. Sometimes in November. I can't actually remember precisely when.
Yes.
So for the next question, this is a picture from the GPT-3 paper, which basically seems to imply a scaling law between how much compute you throw at a language model, and how much validation loss you get. And Guern, in his analogy, compares it with the human level, with basically 0.7 bits per byte of validation loss. It's somewhat of a stretch analogy in my opinion, but plausibly not totally off. And so there's a graph here that you can literally put into Wolfram Alpha, and then it will say that you will hit the 0.7 level at 60,000 times more compute. So if you could just buy that, I'm not quite sure you could actually do that if someone would sell that, but that would cost 28% of the GDP of the United States to do right now. And so if the Manhattan Project ran over like 3-4 years or something like that, then we basically have a roadmap right here, or we will have it very soon. Does this compute anyone, convince anyone, or this kind of argument, or do you think this is plausible?
So you mean that sort of given the rate at which compute is doubling, we would be at the US could buy this for a few percent of GDP within a few years, is the claim, and then you could have a Manhattan Project type expense, like right now 28% of the GDP of the US is sort of immense, but you could have a Manhattan style expenditure within a few. That's interesting.
Well, actually, $720 billion is less than 4% of US GDP.
Sorry, that's me looking up things wrong. Sorry, but that's
well, it's interesting because it is equivalent to the U.S. the military expenditure, their budget of last year, which is maybe not GDP linked, but it's interesting to see that type of. It's a lot of money. But yeah, John Clark.
What was the remaining element of the question?
So the main is, why do we need a roadmap to a roadmap when we have a roadmap here?
Well, what I would say there is that this is not an engineerable roadmap. But if this hypothesis is correct, broadly speaking, then we're already on the runway, and if someone wanted to spend this amount of money today, they could get there in a small number of years. So I hold open that possibility. All I've been trying to express in this session is that our priors should weigh against that.
Sorry, could I ask a rather naive question? With all this compute, what is it you're computing? I mean, what is this machine? What capabilities is it supposed to have?
The GPT-3 is currently basically doing text prediction. So you put in some.
Why is that AI? I mean, that's big computing problem, but hardly its repertoire of compared with even a small mammal is pretty trivial.
That's of course where it is right now. That it's making a lot of mistakes, but potentially you could just ask it for how could you have a plan for taking over the world, and then it will just say the next words, and the next words will be a feasible plan to obtain a decisive strategic advantage.
Or the next words would be what the training data or the training corpus, like what the people on the internet think would be the plan for strategic advantage, I guess.
Yes, but it remains deeply unclear how strong of insights could be distilled from this huge corpus. That's an area of AI research that still seems quite under-theorized. So I think that's an example of one of the things that could broaden the surface area of the problem if we got a better sense as a research community how well that approach could scale, whether you could read every word that's ever written and come up with time travel, or whether there are some hard ceilings that cannot be overcome by text prediction. I suspect the answer is more toward the latter, that there are ceilings, but the fact that it's not infinity still leaves a whole lot of room for discovery of just how high or how low the ceiling is.
I mean, anecdotally, there's interesting cases where they had systems that were trained, I think, on like material science discovery, and then they were able to, what's the phrase? So retroactively predict certain types of compounds that were then later were actually discovered by humans. But sort of the system could predict them several years in advance based on sort of the so there is I guess a domain focused precedent for if you had a system like that, it could actually come up with strategies that are not just reproducing what we've come up with. It comes up with sort of strategies that are missing from our landscape. But I'm quite uncertain about this.
And I'll just flag that this gets at a broader open area of research, which is around the limits of intelligence itself. What I mean by that is in some domains, on some questions, it's clear that scaling up intelligence will not increase performance. For example, in chess, some positions are just lost positions, assuming your opponent plays even competently. It doesn't matter whether you have alpha 0 omega, alpha 0 omega plus plus plus. If your ELO rating is 5,000 or 1,000,000, in a lost position, you're not going to win. And the reason is, in chess, the decision space is very tightly restricted by the rules of the game. If the AI came up with a plan to distract the other player and switch the pieces around when they weren't looking, that might work in a certain sense, but the rules of the game say that's not a valid winning strategy. But in other areas, like physics discoveries, it's unclear how much the application of ever greater intelligence can let you keep knocking down walls and making advances. And so one of the areas that I expect to get a lot more attention over the coming decade as we get closer to AGI is really trying to get a firmer sense of what intelligence allows us to do in an abstract way and what sorts of limits that implies.
Okay.
Never mind.
So there is here some weighing up and down with here there's an extended quote from your paper here, which weighs some factors up and down, and and there are advantages to having a roadmap, but there seem to be some strong disadvantages potentially in that a roadmap would help the runner-up. If there is a roadmap, and according to the roadmap, the United States will have a decisive strategic advantage in 7 years, that seems like something that would cause China to try to beat them to it and cause an arms race.
Yes. So first I'll just say our citation there was intended to credit Yudkowsky for the term fire alarm rather than to imply his agreement with the broader point around that. So apologies if that was misleading. We are in fact taking a contrary position to Yudkowsky, at least in the broad strokes, that a roadmap could constitute a fire alarm. Also, we're not saying we should build a roadmap. Our position is it's dangerous for someone to have a roadmap, and therefore we should assess how much that danger is growing. That's the roadmap to the roadmap. And the roadmap is what would let the winner win, let alone the runner-up.
Okay, so there's not so many questions from the audience, but I guess we'll go to one further back here. This is a bit more technical with the questions. So here we have 3 scenarios: that we're approaching the runway, we are on the runway, or there is no runway. And there are no compelling reason why we, a priori at least, for why we would think there'd be no runway. And a lot of actors, everybody acts like we're not on the runway. So this suggests that either we are approaching the runway or we are on the runway. At least that's how I understand this quote. But shouldn't it be more, why is this a chance that we are either here or here? Does that make sense?
Yes, our intent by that quote was to suggest that if the second scenario holds, then nobody knows it yet. That is, if they only spent the money, they could get there soon. Therefore, if we're not seeing them spend the money, that is not suggesting that there's no runway, just that they don't perceive there to be a runway. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, that helps clarify. Yeah. And so the second part of the question would be that these 3 factors, that the researchers act like this, and the companies act like this, and the states act like we're not on the runway. It could be an information cascade where everybody is actually sitting with some private information that looks like it should point towards that we are on the runway, but they are updating too much on all the others who seem to appear like we're not on the runway.
I like that. I mean, it's interesting. There's a interesting argument that Gwern has also made, and maybe you've discussed it also already, where he suggests that OpenAI has bought into the scaling hypothesis and sort of wants to pursue that. But his point is also that that they need the scaling hypothesis to be true. So OpenAI needs us to be on the runway already. Because if there are sort of deep underlying breakthroughs, then they have a much poorer chance of competing against DeepMind's approach or some of the other major players. And in his reading, at least, DeepMind and other major labs are loath to sort of sort of pivot away and now really pursue the scaling hypotheses. That may not be so. From other sort of discussions I've had, there are actually a fair number of people within DeepMind as well that are quite enthusiastic and sort of will point to the success of GPT-3 like systems as a rationale for pursuing that more. But it's interesting to see amongst the different labs, which of them how do they weigh the evidence coming out of their own labs? How do they weigh the technical evidence coming out of others' labs? And how do they weigh the sort of the perceptions or the claims from other labs and other teams? That would be an interesting model. I guess there could be a scenario where there is where everyone sort of seems to believe, well, no one else is panicking and moving out into the and really scaling up, and therefore what we have here must not be sufficient to get to AGI. Then it's an interesting question at sort of what level of, like, if the scaling laws don't break, at what level would the nerve or the confidence of different actors that this is not going to go to AGI, at what point does that break?
Yes, I see the information cascade story as being more likely if actors believe that secrecy is hard. That is to say, if you think there's only a very small chance that someone can sneak an AGI Manhattan Project by you in secret, you'll be more likely to trust the public signals they're giving off as revealing the quality of information that they actually have. And I think that would be an interesting area for further research building on this paper of what the signals would actually be for detecting a sprint project of this nature. How plausible could it be that a major effort like this could be undertaken by a nation state without the broader research community knowing? And I suspect that the answer would differ substantially between democratic and authoritarian societies. But I don't know, and I don't have a strong enough understanding of the Chinese AI research community to understand how wide that gap is between how well the US could keep this secret and how well the communist Chinese government could keep this secret.
There's an interesting question, I guess, also there, which has to do with relative state sort of competitive positions. So there's like the debates over, so there's a lot of these debates, okay, is there an arms race between US and China? And if so, who's ahead of it? And there's an interesting CSAT report that came across a while back that was sort of looked at, well, depending on your definition of AI, you will find that either China is ahead or the US is ahead. And if you're talking about robotics, the US is ahead. If you're talking about natural language processing, the US is ahead. If you're talking about like vision systems, then China is ahead. And I'm curious if there's situations where, so if you imagine a situation where the US sort of imposes more export controls and sort of locks down the export of high performance computing chips to China, and if China is not able to advance their native production base of high performance computing, the US will have a significant compute advantage and China will not. And it would be interesting to see how that shapes their domestic perceptions of what will be the, like, whether we're on a roadmap and what are the likely pathways, where you could imagine Chinese researchers not sort of selling research projects that are less compute heavy to their sort of leadership, because they're never going to compete on compute anyway. But this is a lot of speculation. Like, it would be interesting to yeah, explore further.
Could I pitch in with a slightly different perspective on this?
Sure.
'Cause I realise that this discussion is more political than technical, but all the way back when I first read Superintelligence, it was very striking to me that Nick had some suggestions for how we might achieve a superintelligence, but there was one missing, and that was that somebody might come up with a theory of general intelligence, which would seem pretty implausible. But from where I sit, at the intersection of a number of cognitive sciences, there's been a convergence of thinking across AI and cognitive science and neuroscience and philosophy and various other things, out of which there is actually quite a general framework for understanding general cognition, human cognition anyway, and which is mechanizable. And my own interest has been applying those ideas in medicine. And I don't know whether this is an AGI light, but yeah, I think I could persuade you that we could build an AGI light that could do pretty much what the doctors of the world do for a large proportion of medicine. It's not a compute problem, it's a problem of having the right theory.
So which framework is this, would you say? Sorry.
It would take too long to, and it'd be too boring to go into it, but it's about, it's just a line of work that I've been pursuing, and is now be, I think, as I say, at another time, I think I can persuade you that we could build an AGI light that could pretty much cover the whole of medicine, and the constraint isn't computing. I mean, these are not difficult things to compute. It's knowledge. What do the collection of all healthcare professionals in the world know, and how do you capture that? And they understand it, of course. They don't just statistically understand it; they understand it in a much deeper sense. But it seems to me that as far as that AGI light is concerned, for medicine, we're already on a runway, and it wouldn't be billions of dollars to do it. Whether anybody's prepared to fund it for medicine as opposed to warfare, I don't know. So that probably sounds a bit unconvincing because I haven't.
Well, so I find it interesting. So there's an interesting research project that I've sometimes want to look into, and this also relates back to the earlier point we're having. It's sort of like, could we be on a runway and sort of with actors if they don't know it or don't realize it? And there is historical precedent with sort of like, I think Alan Dafoe in his research agenda refers to penicillin as a case where there was a sort of underlying breakthrough, but it took a decade for people and funders to sort of realize that was lying around. And so it's an interesting question of when and where there are what's the phrase, the sort of the debate over the $20 bill in Grand Central, and sort of like, well, are there scientific or theoretical low-hanging fruit or dollar bills lying around actually that aren't recognized in a certain state? So that would be something for the model.
But
Sorry.
I think what you're describing, John, reinforces what we were talking about a little earlier, that AGI is still under theorized, that there's still a lot of room for breakthroughs quite apart from on the computing side that could then unlock what seems to be an overhang on the hardware side, and that's some of the evidence that leads us to expect discontinuous progress.
Yes, I think what I've perceived, and I'm pretty old school AI is that over the last 10, 15 years, we've kind of decided, or probably in the 90s, that good old-fashioned AI had failed; it couldn't deliver, and the last 10 years or so, it's all been brute force of various kinds, whether it's reinforcement learning or the countless different types of big data analysis and so on and so forth. And I think the assumption that good old-fashioned AI has failed is wrong. And I was really struggling to understand why anybody would imagine that just putting more and more compute power expensively into a very large machine would deliver what I use the phrase, any kind of interesting repertoire of capabilities other than predicting text, which is, don't see where that goes. But I do see where building a machine that could basically advise on any topic in medicine. I do know how to build that, and it requires resources, but it's not compute resources. It requires coordination. I mean, I a few years ago, I had a similar idea of a Manhattan Project. I didn't want to call it Manhattan Project. I called it the Greenwood Project. But you could bring a bunch of people together from a lot of different disciplines, and that you could build this thing. And if you can do it for medicine, you could probably do it for a lot of other fields as well. As I said, that's not the question you're asking. You're interested in a political question rather than a technical one. But I do struggle with the way the political debate, political discussion, what it's grounded in. It's not kind of grounded in anything that I can understand as an AGI with a broad range of capabilities. I'm sorry if I'm being. I don't want to be critical. I'm just struggling.
No, not at all. Well, just to clarify a bit on text prediction,
Yes.
I think what people mean by that in the context of GPT 345N is that if humans can output only through a linguistic channel, like in a Turing test, then a text prediction task is functionally equivalent to human intelligence. But what remains under-theorized is whether the kind of text prediction architecture that GPT uses could actually achieve the performance that human cognition does. But in terms of the underlying task of getting a prompt and then answering that prompt, that's the fundamental similarity between what our brains do and what a GPT style transformer does.
I still struggle. It sounds just so similar to, if you had enough monkeys and typewriters, you'd end up with Shakespeare. You wouldn't. And if you did, it wouldn't be interesting because the monkeys wouldn't understand anyway.
In a sense, you may be proven right on that, John, in that it might turn out that the curve does bend, that scaling GPTs up takes us further than where we are now, but still lands well short of AGI. And in that case, then you're just adding monkeys and not making progress as you scale up with more compute beyond that point. We just don't know today in October 2020 how that question will turn out.
Okay. So I'll move towards the next question. I hope that answered it, John. And that's
we had an interesting discussion. I'm still struggling.
Okay, so this is another quote from your paper. A broadly shared set of metrics for assessing how close we are to the runway would reduce the risk of compromising AI safety. And that's, of course, one thing it could do. in that if people believe that we are not in an arms race situation, then there would be not so much of a rush, but it could also do precisely the opposite, trigger an arms race. And if people can see that building this roadmap will possibly turn into an arms race, then there seems to be two kinds of interest. There are the AI safety concerns, which motivates don't publish a roadmap if it will turn into an arms race. And then there are the strategic concerns, which say do publish a roadmap if it will give us a strategic advantage. And it seems like states care much more about strategic concerns than AI safety in practice, so they will choose that.
I think the difference is that the AI safety community has a lot of inherent disadvantages compared to nation states, in that we are decentralized, we are not particularly well funded, and we don't have the same strategic imperatives impelling risk-taking that nation states do. Therefore, they have very strong incentives that will press them into this arms race, no matter what the AI safety community does. On the other hand, taking this road mapping seriously can, I think, very meaningfully increase the AI safety community's ability to counteract those dangers or mitigate them. So basically, my answer there comes down to the difference in base rates, that the danger is already so manifest with nation states. Already Dominic Cummings, the chief advisor to the UK Prime Minister, has blogged about AGI as a potential arms race super weapon target. So in the context of that level of awareness already being present among the most influential strategic advisors in cabinet level decision making, that suggests to me that the horse is already out of the barn when it comes to not spooking nation states into an arms race. I see it as quite likely that an arms race will take hold at some point in the next decade or so. And really the thing that we can control as the AI safety community is whether we're ready for that arms race, whether we have plans for how to mitigate it, how to steer state actors in safer directions. I don't think we can prevent the arms race, but if we at least have this discussion early, we can make the arms race relatively less risky. I don't think that's a terribly encouraging thing to say, but it's honest.
Well, thank you for that answer. It's getting a bit late here, so I'm thinking, if anyone have any final questions or comments? Well, while people think about if they have any final questions, then I would like to say thank you to you, John Clark Levin, and to Matthias Mars. Thank you for coming here. It's been a pleasure hearing you, and I've learned a lot, and I think a lot of us have learned a lot. So thank you very much for coming here. We appreciate it very much, and good luck with future papers and whatever you decide to do.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And thank you for the questions also. You're very, very provocative and interesting.
Yes,
Could I
thank
ask,
you.
there was a question to me from Stephen Hoover, I think.
I think it was more of a comment.
Well, okay. I'd like to pick it up with you outside this meeting. Thanks a lot.
Sure. I do have a question for the authors if you guys have a moment. I
Yes.
realize it's like, so I think I was confused when you guys were talking about the intelligence problem. Like you'd phrased it about something like theories of we don't have good theories of like the boundaries of intelligence. For instance, I think you gave examples of problems that like might not be solved. You could think of it like two doors with equal probability of events. One of them is bad, one of them is good, but you can't redo it. So you just have to make a decision. And if you don't have any other priors or anything else to update with, is that a good characterization of what you guys are saying? And then if so, I have a follow-up. But if not, maybe I've misunderstood.
So I think the idea that there would be situations where the ground for decisions is sort of limited, or the information available to make decisions is limited to an extent that just adding more intelligence in certain directions won't help you make better solutions. So like in the case that you described, you'd have a 50% chance, and so I think that would be the case, that there's limits to the performance gains that intelligence can buy you in those cases. But what would be your? So I'd be curious to hear your follow-up.
Yeah, I think that's like, I certainly don't disagree with that. I was curious why you found that to, or why it was mentioned, because I didn't think that was as interesting of a problem. Like it seemed like you could formalize a problem that does not have a solution, and that's fine, but it like doesn't have a solution. So I was wondering why that would be interesting from your perspective.
Well, it gets to parameterizing how transformative AGI or superintelligence would be. For example, in the social manipulation domain, that would be much more dangerous if it were possible to come up with a tweet-length character string that could get anyone to commit suicide. That would be vastly more dangerous than one that merely is quite persuasive.
So it's like it does skill a persuasion sort of keep scaling beyond human levels, or is it like does it reach an asymptote beyond which it's being vastly more intelligent at some point doesn't buy you a lot more ability to persuade people to kill their families, or it sounds a bit but sorry.
Yeah, it's a dark analogy, I'm sorry, but
No, I mean that makes sense in a sense, or in a way where you'd ask like, what would you be concerned about? That's intelligible. I think that answers my question. So to characterize your point, it narrows your scope on what to be concerned about, in a sense.
Yeah, I think that does.
Yes.
And of course, there might still leave a fairly large range of problems to be concerned about. So things that, so I think to come back to an earlier point, even if you can't do perfect persuasion of anyone of anything, having a capability that can do fairly reliable radicalization over time can still have big societal impacts. And that, of course, gets more powerful the more you can change people's minds further along with a shorter message. And at the limit, you get John Clark to a complete sort of character reprogram in a tweet-length message. But of course, even long before you get there are things like, okay, well, if you have a system that can spew out text that is basically 80% likely to convince the median voter to vote for the party that you would like them to vote for, then that is already plenty politically disruptive, if not. And that could be enough to spark a Manhattan Project, because if the US worries that China has seeing the debates already right now over sort of Russian election interference and information campaigns and disinformation, and so if one state was about to get a AI capability that gives even just a sort of 60% chance at making people vote for a selected party, that seems sufficiently powerful capability that could that is quite politically if not existential threat, it's quite dangerous. And I see a question over so I think we mentioned DARPA's attempt because that was, I think, a reference we also made in the paper, specifically to do with the Strategic Computing Initiative. I am less familiar with the fifth generation, Japan's fifth generation project. I get the impression that it was, so yeah, based on expert systems. I do think that they, at the time, so it's interesting. I think at the time it was presented as, oh, at the end we'll have a conversational robot or a conversational sort of system. I think people were thinking maybe relatively small in the sense of, oh, and won't that be a great secretary? To sort of stereotype a bit, rather than in DARPA and in sort of military context, more like this will be the general that will like bring our armies to victory. And so I think, to stereotype a little bit, and not being very familiar with the Japan's program, I think it's a difference between someone proposing human level AI because that will do great for entertainment or for domestic services, versus a military research institute proposing it for strategic advantage. But it's an interesting comparison.
Okay, great. Are there any other final questions? Well, then, oh, I see. Just this moment, I thought that was a new question.
No, sorry, it's me.
No. Okay, great. And so the final thing, just before I say goodbye to everyone, would be that next week we'll be discussing Shane Legg's work on intelligence. Stephen will be giving a presentation there, and there are we will only read a subset of the paper. I will send a message on Skype to everyone about what we read next week. So that is all for tonight. Again, thank you very much, Matthias and John Clark. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you for hosting, and thanks to everyone in the group for these great questions and a very stimulating discussion.
Great. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.